What is up, fellow Terps? Welcome into Fear the Podcast, a new basketball podcast we're starting on the Inside Maryland Sports YouTube channel and podcast stream. So if you're listening to this, thanks for checking us out. I'm Matt Modderno. I'm a 2010 grad, of the University of Maryland and the Merrill College of Journalism. So life for Terp here, and I'll be doing a little bit more content on the channel here for stuff. And joining me for this one is Karels of GigEm247, the Texas A&M 247 site. So Carter, thanks for coming on and talking a little the Texas A&M, now Maryland basketball for us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matt.
We're just going to kind of go through what to expect from the newcomers here. You've got some familiarity with these guys, and I think any insight you can provide will definitely be helpful for me and certainly, hopefully, the other folks listen to this as well. So just maybe let's just start out, like, overall thoughts on Buzz Williams. Like, is this a good hire for the Terps? Should we be excited?
I think it's probably a good hire, but not a great hire. And I feel like that's probably the sentiment at Maryland too, that like, hey, of all the options that were maybe out there, this guy from a resume perspective probably has one of the best resumes you could have out of guys that were attainable. But at the same time, you look and you say, hey, last Sweet 16 was 6 years ago. Last Elite Eight was, 12 years ago. And at A&M, there was a clear ceiling there. I think he doesn't get enough credit for what he did at A&M as far as raising the floor of the program, because when he walked in, A&M was really on a downturn, and then COVID happened, and he didn't really get that first or second year bump that a lot of new coaches get when they have kind of that energy and excitement, because COVID happened. And
Sure.
And
That's a good point.
he raised the floor of the program to where they were, a 20-win machine and, very competitive in the SEC, which is, the best conference. But there was a clear ceiling there. Never made it to the second weekend, only won 2 tournament games. And so kind of a bittersweet, tenure at A&M, where I think a rational fan could look at it and say, hey, this was good. But was it great? Was it amazing? Was it awesome? So that's probably how I'd categorize it.
Maryland fans, I think, are kind of used to that at this point. That's honestly how I'd label our last 2 coaching tenures. So one of those also being an A&M guy, as most folks listening to this are familiar with. So probably par for the course here overall. Sometimes when a coach leaves, fans are just naturally a little sensitive about it after the fact. Maryland fans, I think, will be a little mad at Kevin Willard here for a while, just the way it ended. But I still think it's a good way to judge how, fan bases felt about a coach when they left. If they're happy he's gone, that's usually not a great sign for the new school taking that person on. So I guess what's the mood from the A&M fan base about Buzz moving on?
Well, he was very polarizing at A&M because if you looked at the last 3 years, buzzball, as I call it, it was so up and down. You would have these 8-game losing streaks followed by beating Auburn at home by 12, and followed by a 6-game winning streak. And, you would turn on an A&M game one Tuesday night and they could look like the worst team in the country. You turn them on Saturday and they look like the best team in the country. It was just so hot and cold, so up and down. And so, I think fans started to become used to that, to where when the good would happen, they'd say, yeah, but wait for the bad to happen. But then on the flip side, when the bad would happen, say, well, just wait, they'll figure it out. And so I think fans were growing tired of that because they didn't see it as a sustainable thing where, hey, if you're trying to win a bunch of games in a row in a tournament setting, you can't play so up and down. And there were some flaws within the system, whether you want to talk about, not being a great 3-point shooting team or not defending the 3-pointer well. Well, when you played a team that was hot from 3,
it's a tough night.
Right. And you look at, the past tournaments when they lost to Penn State, this year when they lost to Michigan, there'd be like one guy that would go off against this team. And it was kind of that recurring theme with, a lot of those losses. And so I think fans, by the end of it, the thing about Buzz is he's such a unique guy that, when things are going well, you're like, you want to give him a hug. You're like, this guy's amazing. I'm buying what he's selling.
It charms you at that point, right? Like,
yeah, it's charming. It's so unique that you're just like, who is this guy? This is amazing. But when it's bad, it looks really corny. It doesn't have the same feel. And so with these upward and downward swings, I just think fans got kind of tired of that, to where they kind of realize, like, okay, we know what to expect now. We know what this is, and it's not going to get any better. And this past A&M team was full of seniors. This was the year for them to really do it. And I think had they gone to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, something like that, I mean, again, A&M has never made the Elite Eight in their history. So to expect that seems probably crazy, but that was kind of the thought with this team and what had been built. And so to not make that, it just said, well, if he can't make it to the second weekend, then when can he make it? And so that's why I think by the end of it, there were some kind of hard feelings about, man, this guy's just not going to take them over the top.
It just wears on a fan base, I would imagine. That's the case here for the last kind of two coaches at a certain point, where just you got tired of riding the roller coaster of beat this team, can't win on the road, beat this team, oh, another road loss to somebody you shouldn't lose to. Like, those things just get old for a while. And felt like maybe for Maryland, we were a little past that with this year's, Crab 5 group, but didn't quite work out for us, just given the way that other coaching stint ended for us. So just, I don't know, last kind of things here. Like, I've heard some people allude to, like, I don't know, you mentioned sort of the quirkiness of Buzz there a little bit. There being some maybe drama or baggage behind the scenes. I don't think it sounds like anything necessarily like bad, but just whether he just sort of wears out his welcome with administration, or whatever the case may be. Any insight you can shed into that for us?
Well, I do think that he wasn't just looking to leave this year. I think it was in the works for at least a year. I know he was in the mix for the Arkansas job this past cycle, the Oklahoma State job. He was in the mix for that as well. A&M, they had to hire a new athletics director in February of 2024, and Buzz Williams was part of that committee. And I think the guy that they landed on, the current AD, Trev Alberts, probably wasn't his top choice. Okay. And Trev Alberts, one of the first things he did was lay off a bunch of senior officials to kind of cut money and sort of that thing. And one of the senior administrators he cut was the guy who oversaw basketball. And so you kind of immediately had some kind of, okay, well,
some tension there maybe.
There. Yeah. And then you also, knowing Buzz Williams, he never really stays anywhere for longer than 5 or 6 years. And so you kind of had that sense that he was looking to get out. I don't think he was, dog cussing and going nuts and being unprofessional per se. But I do think there is something to, like, hey, you talk to folks at Virginia Tech, his exit there wasn't great. Right. His exit here wasn't ideal. There's kind of a stench to it there. Was it something that's going to, prevent him from getting another job or make the news? Probably not. But does he handle it perfectly? Maybe not. Because as soon as the season ended, he was kind of nowhere to be found. His assistants were kind of handling a lot of the recruiting stuff. Sure. You get this sometimes with coaches who move on, but I think just kind of the way it happened and A&M having to inherit essentially nothing kind of left A&M in a bad spot. So I think there is some hard feelings because you say, man, A&M doesn't have a single player on their roster, or I guess they have one who's a walk-on, and they've since landed a commitment. But they're really starting from scratch. And then the news came out that A&M, because of the coaching change, dropped out of the NIL tournament, and Maryland has taken its place.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And so A&M fans were kind of like, hey, what the heck, man? So there's some bitterness there, but I don't know if it's anything that's like that crazy.
I gotcha. Unfortunately, like seemingly abnormal or seemingly normal stuff and nothing too out of the ordinary in today's college basketball. And I think we're battling some of those same things with a totally new slate coming in here. And we've just heard some different rumblings about maybe who Buzz is or isn't reaching out to and things like that. And just definitely you get the vibe that this guy does his thing, does things his own way here. And it's just not sort of the typical salesy coaching vibe that you get from a lot of these guys. He's just content to do it his way. And a lot of, the assistants do a lot of the smoothing over, it seems like. So we'll see. But he has turned this into at least the makings of a solid roster here so far. And unfortunately for your guys' sake, doing that with some of the bones of what would have been coming back for A&M. Let's start with just probably the biggest piece coming over here, and that's Pharrel Payne, 6'9", forward, maybe small ball center, if you want to call him that. But this seemed like a guy that was really trending up, at the end of the year here, averaged about 10-5, give or take, but 2 20-10-ish games in the NCAA tournament. And it really looked like his best basketball was ahead of him. I'm sure that's a loss you guys are feeling a little stung by, but what can you tell us about Pharrel Payne? And is this a dude we should be excited about?
Oh, absolutely. This guy has all the makings of a guy that could be all conference this coming season. He probably would have been all conference had he stayed at A&M. He's a guy that can just take over a game. Kind of your old school guy, not going to shoot threes, not going to shoot, anywhere outside 6 feet, right? Sure. But he can really bully some guys. I mean, I remember there was a play against Auburn where he just backed into Janae Broome so hard that he hurt his shoulder and he had to come out of the game for 10 minutes because he just bullied the guy. Yeah, and that's one of the best players in the country. And there were stretches though with him where, and you get this a lot with Buzz Williams, where sometimes his teams are formatted to be a who's who. He doesn't care who. He says he doesn't care who starts and how the minutes are divided. He'll have some of his best players come off the bench. He just kind of likes having.
I wondered about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he'll his best player will come off the bench sometimes. Pharrel Payne came off the bench a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he wasn't the best player, but he was definitely a guy that should have been starting all year. And with that, sometimes you'll get a who's who where some games 3 guys will go off that are totally different than the next game of 3 guys going off. You might have one player who every game goes off, but the other 2 guys, it'll depend on the game. And Payne had some of that where there'd be some games where he'd score 2 points and get a rebound. And then there'd be some games where he'd get 25 points and 12 rebounds. But I do think that he's a guy that's deserving of being in that starting lineup. And he's a guy that can, in limited minutes, probably should have played more, was still averaging double digits and really had a slow start to the season. But since probably about Christmas, he really asserted himself. And, just an old school guy who I think Maryland fans are going to love just because he's going to dunk on guys. He's going to bully guys. He's going to generate a lot of highlights.
You mentioned that sort of turnaround for him midway through the season there. Do you think there was a particular thing that sparked that? Is that just a way they used him? Is it just a mindset change from him, just locking in or getting more comfortable? Or I guess any sense for what kind of drove that turnaround?
Yeah, I don't know in particular, but one thing I will say with Buzz is the way he structures his off seasons is very unique. It is unlike anybody. So newcomers, it takes a while to adjust to that. He'll do a boot camp where they're more focused on what books you're reading than basketball, right? He'll teach players how to do their taxes and give them books to read. And he's so much more focused on sort of the brotherhood and the culture aspect of things. And then he figures out the basketball part of it later. And the philosophy there is you need chemistry, you need togetherness, you need culture, and then you can figure out, what play you're running out of bounds. And so when you have new guys in there that, don't know the plays, don't know the system, don't know, who they're playing with, it can take them a little bit to get accustomed to what they're doing. We saw time and again transfers not do Anderson Garcia for A&M last year. One of the best offensive rebounders in the country would basically when he first transferred to Mississippi State 3 years ago, did nothing for the first like 15 games, and then he became an amazing player for this team. And a lot of it's because it takes a little bit for these guys to get comfortable. So that's something to maybe expect going forward. Just kind of a behind the scenes thing that like, hey, these off seasons are kind of weird and they're done differently, but they see a real payoff because the way they do it is they want to structure it that way so that they peak later in the season when they've got it all gelled and figured out.
It's also a reason for optimism here for Maryland fans because now he's got this year under his belt with Pharrel Payne, and maybe they can hit the ground running and come out, a little stronger out of the gates here and see more of that momentum he seemed to be picking up at the end of the season. But by the end there, he was like driving on guys. They were posting him up a good amount. Like they were using him as kind of more of an offensive hub than I remembered seeing, in that first, players era, field. So that's a reason for excitement. I think I couldn't get a sense for how much of a driver he was on the defensive side. Like he seemed like a good defensive big, but how would you categorize him as a rim protector? Is he a mobile, switchable guy? Maryland switched a lot of 1 through 5 last year. You think Payne is a guy that can do that, or will we see something like that under Buzz?
Yeah, I think he's more of a rim protector type where, he's definitely a good shot blocker. He will block some shots, but I don't know if he's the guy that's going to guard your guards on the perimeter and switch a whole bunch. I think A&M would like, or I think Maryland would like him to do that. But I don't know if he's the switched 1 through 5 type. He's more of that, toward the basket, blocking shots, bodying bigs, that kind of thing.
I don't know how much you watched of Maryland this past year. He reminds me a little bit of Julian Reese, who's outgoing here for the Terps, a guy who's going to score well around the basket. Not maybe the most extensive arsenal there, but finds a way to get it done. Pretty solid defensively. Not the biggest guy, but moves his feet well enough. So you get a little bit of everything there. I don't think there's a ton of holes, but he's not going to stretch the floor for you. I don't know. It seemed like he could kind of, like you said, go away for stretches. And that was also kind of a knock on Julian Reese where he'd go, 20 and 9 in the game and then 4 and 6 in the next game. You'd be like,
yeah,
oh, okay. Like why, what happened there? So we'll be used to that, I guess, is what I'm saying at the very least.
For sure.
Let's move on to the kind of forward wing spots here. I guess I'm actually looking for you to tell me a little bit how you view these guys. So Solomon Washington is the next name, 6'7", seemed like probably the best defender on the team. This is your guy that could guard, honestly, probably 1 through 5, depending on the matchup. I don't know if you'd classify him as a small big or a big wing or if it even really matters, but didn't put up like the biggest numbers, but seemed like a really important piece to what A&M did last year.
Yeah, he is a lot of times the heart and soul of the team, just from the edge standpoint that he brings. I don't know if I'd call him the heart and soul, but the edge factor,
Sure.
He brought the edge. He's the guy that's going to be talking trash the entire game. He'll hit a 3. He'll look to the visitor bench and say all kinds of mess, right? Mm-hmm. He is the guy that will hype you up from that standpoint and will get a lot out of his teammates from that regard. He is your best defender, right? Can switch 1 through 5, can go out in the perimeter and guard the quicker guards, can guard the bigger guys too. 6'7", so if you've got a really big guy, it could probably cause some problems. But I thought he was probably deserving of being SEC all defensive team. Didn't make the group. I know that they kind of felt slighted by that. I think the hole with him is just his offensive game. I joke that his jump shot looks like Charles Barkley's golf swing.
Not what you want to hear. Okay.
Yeah. A little broken there. I think he shot about 25, 26, 27% from 3. So
19% this past year, unfortunately. So even worse than we're remembering already. And 36% from the field. But that is down from the year before. So last year he averaged about 5 and 5 and 1 block per game, which is great from that kind of player. But the year before was 7.5 and 6 points per game and shot almost 50% from the field. So I was wondering if last year was just the slump or if this is really, we should expect something somewhere in between the two of just, this is not going to be the guy to kind of move the needle for you offensively.
Yeah. I mean, it's been 3 years. This is his last year. I don't expect him to take a huge jump offensively. And I don't think that ideally that would be his role. I think that he'd be expected a lot of his threes, and I think what makes the 19% concerning, a lot of them were open. A lot of them were, hey, yeah, go ahead and shoot it, and still not knocking them down. And so that could be a concern. I think he does give you so much athleticism and length that, like, when you're running the court and you can lob it to him, or he can, run to the rim, like, that's a real threat. And obviously offensive rebounding, he certainly can do a lot there. So he does give you some stuff on the offensive side of the ball that's probably more not on the stat sheet, but a lot of what he's going to do is defensively. And I just don't think after 3 years he's going to take this crazy jump.
I gotcha. Yeah, I would settle for sophomore year numbers. At least that's enough to kind of not be a total hole on that end of the court here too. Just pivoting to the next guy here, another wing, similar size guy, redshirted last year. He got 6'7", George Turkson Jr. I know almost nothing about him. There aren't even like that many, like, I can't find like a full game, anywhere to watch and get up to speed here. So I know you didn't get to see him a ton on the court last year, but what do you know? What have you heard? And what should we expect, I guess, from Turkson this season?
Yeah, don't know. Haven't seen a whole lot of him, but just from what I've known, what I've heard is that probably similar to Solomon Washington, same height, not the most developed offensively, but hey, he can rebound, he can defend, he can do kind of the other stuff. And so I think that's probably the expectation, is that, hey, if he's not seeing the court, it's probably because his offensive game is not developed enough.
Gotcha. Yeah, that tracks from what I'm picking up so far there too. The guy I have seen a little bit more of the two red shirts there, and I am excited about, is 6'4", big guard. I'd call him, I guess, Andre Mills. I don't know if he's necessarily like a point guard, but he does seem like a guy that can kind of run some offense for you. Did that at least at the high school level. Lefty slasher, was pretty physical for that level of play already, and a good athlete. So I was actually surprised that's a guy they got to redshirt a year, because it's usually for the players that need that year of physical development. But Buzz seems to have a way of convincing guys that, hey, if you stay here, put another year of work in, you'll be better for it that next year down the road. So I'm hoping we get to see, the payoff from that. But this is probably the guy of the lesser known players here that I think I'm most excited about long term.
Yeah, he also was on George Turkson's AAU team up in Boston. And yeah, he's definitely the one to be more excited about than Turkson. Okay. Buzz loves his lefties.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think the slashing type is kind of what we've heard with him. We heard that, hey, he did pretty well and on the scout team over the last year, but other than that, we haven't seen him in games, so not a whole lot to say there. But I do know that if you're going to pick a guy to be excited about that maybe you don't know a whole lot, it'd be him, just because he did it in practice. He's a little bit more developed offensively than Turkson, and just gives you a lot more all around.
A name for Maryland fans that haven't seen him play yet. He gave me a little bit, and I'm not saying he'll be this kind of player, but Des Wells vibes for us, kind of a bigger – guard / maybe wing, but can slash to the basket, uses physicality, get to the rim here a little bit, finish with like a lot of tough runners off the glass and things like that. I don't think you'll see him doing a ton of 3-point shooting this year, or at least a ton of 3-point making, unfortunately, but also profiles like a guy who should be a pretty good perimeter defender here. And I wouldn't be surprised that, if you see him at the 3 some in some of these 3-guard lineups, because I think he's physical enough to be able to do that and survive against some of the bigger players here. So I think there's some reason for optimism there, but none of those 4 names would I call any of them a particularly good perimeter shooter. And that seems to be a recurring theme with those A&M teams. A lot of missed threes, but a lot of rebounds and putbacks. So I was wondering, almost like, is that like a bug or a feature? Like, is that a thing they're trying to do, or just a limitation they had, from the roster sense? But it seems like he's okay taking guys knowing they can't shoot and just being willing to live with what they do well and working, the system around them. Is that like a fair picture, from what you guys have seen?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, because, everyone in the sport is going one way and he's going the other. And you could argue there's kind of an evil genius wow, he might actually be the smartest one in the room.
Mhm.
But then there's also, when it's not working well, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe get some 3-point shooters, because
Mhm.
the idea behind it is, if you look at A&M stats over the last 3 years, what they were incredible at was offensive rebounding and
Yep.
getting to the free throw line.
Mhm.
And so if you were just measuring points per possession or offensive efficiency, A&M actually rated really high in both.
Sure.
Even though they're like the worst shooting team in the country, the worst 3-point shooting team in the country, you'll
Mhm.
hear Buzz Williams say all the time, he uses the word predictable. We want to shoot predictable shots. And what that basically means is shooting shots where you can get an offensive rebound if it's going to be a miss, and not forcing things that are, your guys aren't in a good position for. And so, and A&M did have the personnel for this. I mean, they had a few guys that were just extraordinarily great at getting offensive rebounds. They had Wade Taylor, who was great getting to the free throw line. And so it could depend what Maryland's personnel is there. But the way he would do it is, hey, yeah, you're not making any of your threes, and the other team made 9 more threes, but we had 12 more offensive rebounds. We had 15 more rebounds. We had 20 more free throw attempts, and we shot 10 more balls. He likes to measure how many shots each team shoots. So this team that they're facing might shoot, 50 balls, but A&M shot 62. And even though A&M shot at the worst percentage, well, they made more shots because they shot more. And it sounds so weird to say out loud, because it's goes against where everyone else is trending. But it makes a lot of sense, because, hey, if you're shooting more free throws, if you're getting more offensive rebounds, if you're putting up more shots, that's another way to trick the analytics to do what you want them to do. And so where that runs into an issue is there will be some games where you're literally like 5 for 30 from three.
Right. It's a total rock fight. Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah. And then there will be games where the other team makes 15 threes, and you just can't do anything about that. And the one weakness with Buzz's defense, it was phenomenal this past year. It was the best it's been at A&M. They were top 10 in defensive rating pretty much the entire year. The one weakness is the weak side of the defense. You're going to get a ton of open threes.
Yeah, I noticed that, which I didn't love.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about that is A&M would actually do a pretty good job shutting down the best player, even the second best player. But some random dude you've never heard of would hit 10 threes. Like, you look at the OU games this past year, Bryson Goodine, guy would average like 4 points a game. Probably went way up because of,
And like a 5-3 game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he had like 32 one game against A&M. The other game he had like 26 or something.
Mhm.
But this guy did nothing the entire year, but against A&M went off. Michigan, same thing. Guy went off against them that didn't really do a whole lot beyond that. So you're going to get some of those, and it'll be really frustrating. But the way Buzz views it is, hey, it still averages out in their favor. And yeah, you're going to have 6 games where you want to die watching the basketball that's being played. But there's also going to be when you beat the number 1 team in the country at home, and you're like, oh, yeah, this works. So that's kind of the belief behind it.
Yeah, more times than not, you're playing the odds here that 7th guy, in the lineup isn't going to be the guy that beats you. And like you said, some nights that might be your downfall here. But I don't mind kind of living with that and picking your poison here a bit. I do think that this team will have to shoot a little bit better to go anywhere. Like, you look at the best teams in the country the last couple of years, and they have been really good offensive rebounding teams. Getting way more possessions than people is definitely a great way to give yourself a leg up, but you can't be totally, outmatched from the line. So I think if they get a little bit better in that direction, he can get a couple more of these two-way guys. That would be really nice to see. And the one thing I'm most excited about, a couple years ago, the first year under Kevin Willard, when Maryland got into the NCAA tournament, they played Alabama in the second round. And it was just noticeable at how much of an athleticism disadvantage they were at. I don't think that's going to be the case with a Buzz Williams team. Like, he seems to stack this roster with a lot of mobile, switchable athletes, and you can argue how far they can switch up and down the lineup, but there's dudes here that aren't going to be like blown off the court from a physicality standpoint either. And I think we've lacked for that a little bit. This year's Maryland team was a little better in that department, but still maybe had some room to grow when you got to the Floridas and teams like that. Whereas I don't think these guys coming over are going to necessarily like be out athleted at the very least. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing a triple option team in football where it may not even be athleticism. It's more just the mentality that his teams bring. Like they're going to be diving on the floor. They're going to be, playing really hard defense. They're going to be crashing the glass. I mean, the thing that I think Maryland fans will love the most is A&M players would learn how to basically do these volleyball tips.
The back tap. Yeah, I love the back tap.
Taps. Oh my gosh, they perfected that, and they practice it like crazy. And you'll get 6 offensive rebounds one game because of that stupid thing, and it'll frustrate opponents, and they don't know quite how to be ready for it because it's such a shock to the system when every single possession they're attacking the glass like that. So I do think that, yeah, like when you're facing the Alabamas, you even look at the A&M Alabama game this year, A&M did not have Wade Taylor, their best player, right, and they nearly won the game because they just were, at another level at all the other stuff that they do. And so it just sort of can totally throw certain teams off depending on the matchup.
I can live with that. Are there any other players left on this roster or in the portal from an A&M that we can try to steal from you guys? Any other names here we should be keeping an eye out for, you think?
No, unfortunately for Maryland, A&M graduated.
We're tapped out.
8 players.
Okay.
8 players. They had 10 contributors last year. 8 of them are gone. Wow. The other 2 were Solomon Washington and Pharrel Payne. So that's about it.
All right. Well, I hope you guys are able to restock things there. Any final thoughts here on the Buzz Williams era here, or what Maryland fans should be looking out for? Anything we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I just think Buzz Williams is one of the most fascinating guys in the sport, and that's good and bad. I think you guys are probably going to watch more press conferences than you've ever watched because he'll just say stuff that you're like, did he really just say that? And wait, he knows this guy? Like he's best friends with, some celebrity. I've never you'll be kind of dumbfounded by the stuff you hear him say, good and bad. But I do think that the one word of advice I'd give that I've learned is to never overreact to good or bad what he does, because the highs and the lows and the roller coaster is real. And the second you put out a tweet, this team's done, they suck, they're not making the tournament, they're going to win 12 straight games, and that tweet's going to look really stupid. And then the second you say, we have the best team in the country, watch out, Michigan, you're toast, and, all this, then they're going to lose 6 straight, and you're going to be devastated. So just beware of the roller coaster and don't overreact to anything that happens.
We're so good at that as a fan base, so I'm sure that'll go over super well here. You're talking to someone that when Maryland started 1-3 in the Big Ten had a total meltdown about them being in the NIT eventually, and they ended up in the second weekend of the tournament here. So I will do my best to follow that advice, and hopefully everybody else listening here as well. Carter, you've been so generous with your time, and I really appreciate all the insight here, making me feel a little bit better about this group of guys overall. So thank you for doing that. If anybody would like some more Texas A&M coverage, please tell us where they can find you and the great work that you do.
Yeah, GigEm247.com is where the website is, and at Carter Karels on Twitter is where you can find me.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Keep it in the 24/7 family here. Go check us out at InsideMDSports.com as well. I'm sure Jeff and the guys will be back with another IMS radio here coming up later in the week. So stay tuned for that, and hopefully some more commitments. Seems like Buzz is kind of rationing them out one at a time here. So hopefully by the time this drops, we'll have another couple guys on the roster here. Carter, good luck to you guys. I'm a big Bucky McMillan guy, so hopefully he treats you well, and
Yeah.
we can have more basketball to talk about, maybe a tournament matchup or something here in the future.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you having me.
All right, everybody, you know the drill. Hit review or review, subscribe, all that good stuff for us. We appreciate you. We will catch you next time, and fear the podcast.